Guys, welcome to the Jesus People podcast. I have the honor of having Jeff and Shaunti Feldhahn on today, and this is a long time coming for a couple like you guys, for a lot of listeners who are desperate for marriage advice. And to be honest, guys, I can't imagine a better couple to have on the Jesus People podcast. So I'm so grateful. Thank you guys for driving all the way you did. Very, very honored and grateful to have you guys on.
Oh, you're so kind.
Yeah,
Thank
grateful
you.
to be here.
And I feel like I'm sitting in the presence of greatness. I was just telling them, I've had your book on my bookshelf for years. Even when we were first on the phone the other day, I'm like, I didn't know this was you guys. Like, you guys are like the OGs of Christian marriage wisdom.
Thanks.
So,
yeah.
very cool.
It's been crazy.
Which is crazy in the sense that you had a relationship book and you read it. Now, for guys, when we started doing all of this, prior to this, when Shaunti we'd be at, whatever at night, and she'd say, this is a great
really
book,
good
Jeff.
book.
You really need to read it. And it would be a
Yeah.
relationship book. And I never read any of them.
Well, dudes don't really read books as much, right? Let's be real.
We tend
Yeah.
to not.
Yeah.
Especially relationship
Okay,
stuff.
can I just be really real and
Do you
show you
think?
something
Yeah.
really funny?
Yeah,
Okay, because I don't know whether he actually hasn't had a chance to read it or not.
I'm
So-
going to be honest. I don't think I have.
Okay, so
So
we're going
here's
to
the
talk
thing.
you into it. Okay, so because For Women Only it came out first. For
Okay.
Women About Men. So of course
Pretty smart
it
play.
exploded, right? You know?
Publisher was stoked.
Yeah, exactly. So it explodes. So
Mhm.
they wanted us to write the book about women.
Yeah, to help men understand what's going on inside of women. To which I was really resistant because one is I didn't know they could be understood. And that's to be painfully honest.
Yeah,
Look,
yeah.
we have jokes about this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That women are random, they can't be understood. So what that tends to do for guys is we just go, well, why expend the energy if I'm never going to be successful at understanding?
Yeah.
And we write it off.
So the publisher's like, okay, so you need to write the companion book. And he was very reluctant.
Mm.
And we finally sat down and talked about it. And he's like, well, here's the thing. I'm not sure you can be understood, which that wasn't the best thing to say to your wife, But
Yeah.
then second, he's like, guys don't read relationship books. But you know what? When you get a piece of electronic equipment, and who reads the user manual, right? But everybody does read the quick start guide.
Hey.
So literally, he's like, let's create a quick start guide for women. So
Spark Notes.
literally, there's
That's
the
exactly
Spark
right.
Notes in the front of the book, which is hilarious.
You get up and running in 5 minutes.
There
And if you get in trouble, you go to the manual.
There
And
you
I'm
go.
quite sure that all of the women listening to this are like, wait a minute, you mean I'll read a whole book and you'll read the Cliff Notes? Yeah, sorry.
Reality is what reality is.
There you go. Well, if people
All
are
right,
hungry
sorry, I
enough.
was going to try
Yeah.
to make that work there. Okay.
Yeah, so highly recommend the books. I think my parents got these for me for
Oh,
Christmas.
great.
So I'm going to check them out. Yeah.
All right, we
for
will,
sure.
by the end of this podcast, we will try to have convinced you that there is something fun that can really
All
be
right,
done
cool.
with you and Annie with these books.
Well, I'm excited for this podcast because in our 30-minute conversation a week ago, I'm vigorously writing notes. It's like when you talk with an expert about something that's been someone who's been doing something for so long, and they can break down such complicated things that I've maybe thought in little bits and pieces for my whole life. And then you put it in a sentence for me. I was like, oh my gosh. So, and it makes sense. Harvard trained researchers on relationships and marriage. What exactly did you guys train in?
Well, sorry.
I'm a lawyer.
You're a
So
lawyer.
I went to Harvard Law School.
Okay.
And, that analytical, I like to put puzzles together. I like to solve things.
Mm.
So that's kind of the training. And when it was, I don't get her at all. Is it just her? Or is it women in general?
Yeah. So my background is actually, I'm trained as an analyst. I worked on Wall Street.
Oh, okay.
I had absolutely no idea that there was going to be this massive right-hand turn, and using that same skill set, but in a completely different way to
Yeah.
understand relationships. And it started with understanding men and trying to figure out what on earth.
And she is positively fearless about asking questions. If she doesn't understand things, she doesn't try to figure it out later or think that she will. She'll just go right toward the question. And that's a great thing for a researcher, but challenging in
Oh,
a
yeah,
marital
yeah.
relationship
Yeah.
because sometimes I don't really have a good answer, or it takes me a while to figure out why I did something or
That's so
said
good. That's
something.
so right. Because I feel that same way. I'm like, I need a minute to understand why I was just really mad there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to articulate. Give you one little thing, a little tip for every woman out there listening to this. When you begin a conversation that says, "Why did you?" it immediately triggers the guy and puts him on the defensive. Just
Mm.
those little words. So,
And there's all sorts of reasons for that. Can I tell you, so sorry, can I tell you the funny story behind how the book started?
Yeah.
Because this is like every woman is going to completely resonate with this. So literally, we had moved to Atlanta, which is where we live now, from New York, and I had this chance to write a couple of novels of all things, and one of the main characters in the novel was a guy,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized I didn't know how to put thoughts in his head.
Mm.
Like
Mm.
I couldn't just say what this main character was doing. I had to say what the guy was thinking, and I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know. Like, what would a guy be thinking? I have no
Mm.
clue. So I started talking to a bunch of guys, and so like literally, we'd be out to dinner with another couple. So imagine us out to dinner with you and Annie, right? And I would go to you and I would say, okay, here's the scene in the book. What would you be thinking
Mm.
if this was you in this story? And as the guys started telling me what they'd actually be thinking, I was like, seriously? Like, I found
Mm.
myself so shocked by what the men were telling me. And I did more and more and more of these interviews. And I finally realized, wait a minute, what I'm hearing from these men, it's not just that it's surprising,
Mm.
it's that it's incredibly foundational stuff. Like, these things these men were describing, they weren't things that come up, off in a corner once every few months. These were things that these men were describing, feeling and thinking every single day, and
Mm.
often multiple times a day. And at that point, we'd probably been married maybe 8 years or so. And of course, I'm like, why have I not heard this before?
Mm.
And so that's what ended up leading to the For Women Only book, because we did a big national survey of men
Mm.
and found it wasn't just all the men I'd interviewed. This is common.
and the surprise to me in all of this was that she didn't already know it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because I run a script in my head. When she does something that makes me upset or feel less than, I'm thinking she knows exactly what she's doing.
Mm.
And so I run that script. And the fact of the matter is, it wasn't out of bad intent. It was out of a lack of information of me and of guys in general. And she's a smart person, a
Mm-hmm.
godly, kind person. So if she's not doing what I think she should be doing, there's got to be another answer.
Yeah. Why do husbands struggle to share what's going on inside with their wives?
Well, I can tell you from the research, and then maybe Jeff can explain from his experience as well. But from the research, actually, one of the things that's really common is that literally the male brain and the female brain are wired differently. And one of the things that's very common, not all men, but very common, is that there is a process that needs to happen in the male brain for them to A, understand what they're thinking, and B, talk about what they're thinking. And that is something that is for most women, it comes naturally. Our verbal centers are connected. The limbic system functions differently. Like there's all sorts of things that happen in the female brain where we just think about and feel our emotions and talk about them really easily. For men, that's not necessarily the case.
Mm.
And so being able to like dig in, that's one of the reasons we did the survey of the women, right? Be able to dig in and sort of feel, oh, this is common. This isn't just my wife. This is 87% of women or whatever.
Mm.
And same thing with understanding men. Oh,
So what
this
should
is
a
men.
wife do? Like what should if they're like, okay, I know something's going on with my husband, how does a wife bring that up?
Well, one of the most important things is to recognize that men want to be understood and have their feelings be heard just like women do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But so often it is approached like, what's wrong with him? Like something is broken. And that's something a lot of men feel.
We ourselves, at least for me, for years, I thought, there's just something structurally wrong with me because I can't process things as quickly as she can. So therefore, I know I'm upset. I know I'm angry, but I can't find the words to say it. And I'm frustrated with myself. I'm frustrated with her, feeling like she's pushing me to say something. And so I would withdraw, which then triggered her insecurities. And so it creates this soup of bad feelings. And what happened was, when we finally, in the research and unpacked that, I wasn't alone. Most guys are like this. And then when we were able to understand the neurological components of our brains different as men and women, all of a sudden I realized I'm not just some doofus. I'm not just incapable of this. There is something that there's an explanation for it. So now I just need to figure out what tactics to use, one, to be able to support her while I'm processing this sort of stuff and frustration. And it's not rocket science.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the quickest answers to the question of what a wife can do is ask her husband a question and then give him time to process. So it's not like, but what are you thinking? But what are you feeling about what I just said? And he's probably, if he is like the vast majority of men, and I can't remember the number, but in our survey, it was somewhere around 80% of men, which is pretty common, that's about the level for the sort of 80-20 for all these male-female differences. But to be able to ask the question of your husband, and instead of, but what about this? And what are you feeling? To be able to say, it would really help me to be able to talk through why you reacted that way when I said such and such. And is there any way, I know you may need to think about that. Is there any way that we could talk about it maybe tonight at dinner and give him like a space and time for his brain to process? And he will be far better able to come back at having thought about it and thought about what he's feeling. And for a woman, they're like, what do you mean you have to think about what you're feeling? But for most men, that is a very common situation.
Yeah, I think most women don't understand how much shame men feel on a regular basis. And when we feel inadequate, that brings shame.
Yep.
And where we feel most inadequate is, I don't know what's going on in here. So we're in a fight right now. You're really quick. You're telling me exactly how you feel. You've mapped this thing in 30 seconds. I don't know what's happening. So what I'm hearing you say is it's really gracious of a wife to go to her husband and to say, I'm having some stuff happen here. I know you're having some stuff happen here. Can we chat about this tonight? Give him a beat, get him a break to process it, and then come back to the table.
So here's the thing. The guys also have a responsibility in this too.
Sure.
Because we don't understand what's going on inside of them. When we walk away because we're frustrated, all of a sudden that's triggering inside of her, like, are we okay? Is he really upset with me? Is this the beginning of several possible negative things happening in our relationship? So we walk away and we kind of then go to the computer and start gaming or doing something just to kind of get some distance.
Yeah.
She's not given that luxury.
Yeah,
All of a sudden her brain is kicking in with her insecurities about me, about our relationship. So we as guys, just as we're asking our wives to give us a little bit of grace and space, we need to then take that position. I'm upset in the moment and I need to figure out what I'm feeling, but I need to reassure her about ourselves in that moment so I can get the space so she can then also have some relaxation and calm. So I need to say something to the lines of, babe, I'm really upset right now and I just got to unpack my thoughts. I got to figure out what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, all of that. And I'm going to need some time, but I want you to know we're okay. So it gives her that, okay, now she isn't letting her thoughts run on all of the things that she can be running with.
Can I explain one of the things that is underlying all of this? It turns out that one of the most common reasons, and this has been the case in all of our studies over the last 20 plus years, and these are nationally representative research studies. One of the things that we found that is the most common reason behind friction, behind fights, behind hurt feelings, is that we don't recognize that men and women tend to have two different sets of insecurities running under the surface.
Wow.
And so what those insecurities act like are kind of like a raw nerve, right? And
Yeah.
so you can hit that nerve in your spouse and your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You can hit it without having any idea that that's what you're doing. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that we say is like, if you are going to invest any time in trying to understand your spouse, invest it in trying to understand what hurts their feelings. It may seem nuts to you that this hurts their feelings, but here's why. It's because of these different insecurities.
Mm.
And so, can I just give you real quickly what those are?
Mm-hmm.
So, in general, what we found, and this is roughly, depending on the survey, it's roughly 75 to 85% of women, roughly 75 to 85% of men, where the woman's question in her heart is basically, am I lovable?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, am I special to him? Am I worthy of being loved? And it's kind of, am I worthy of being loved for who I am on the
Mm.
inside? We found that for men, their question is radically different. Instead of am I lovable, it's am I able?
Mm.
Am
Dude.
I adequate? Am I any good at what I do on the outside?
Yeah.
Which is totally different. And
Yeah.
so because of those totally different insecurities, it lends itself to a totally different set of things that build your spouse up.
Mm.
So it hits the nerve if you're triggering the am I adequate kind of feeling or the am I lovable kind of feeling. And those are also the places that give us the best opportunity to care for their heart.
Whoa, dude, I completely resonate with that because that am I able? It's like,
Yeah.
am I competent?
Yeah.
And I feel loved if you think I'm competent.
Yep.
And I feel respected if you think I'm competent.
Yep.
I also think this is one of the number one reasons why husbands look at porn.
Oh,
is
for sure.
because you're
Yeah.
going to that pornography to feel competent, to feel like you're the man. And that's not on the wife. That is not the wife's fault. That's not what I'm saying at all. This is a wound to be dealt with the husband. But for me, the reason I was able to get clean from pornography was realizing that I wasn't looking at the porn just because I was horny. I was looking at the porn because I was medicating a wound where I didn't feel competent. And so for wives, I think you're 100% right. If you can make your husband feel able, competent, and husbands, if you can make your wives feel precious, isn't that not the biblical model, Ephesians 5, right?
Totally.
And again, it's not rocket science. We have, as far as the easiest way to help a man feel that sense of adequacy and that he's good at something is, go ahead.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about sex.
No. I'm talking about what phrase can she say?
Oh, okay. We ended up doing, yeah, because of course all the women are like, okay, great, it's all about sex again. No, we actually did a study in order to find out what you can say to your husband or your boyfriend that has the same impact on him that I love you does for women. And it turns out that it's thank you.
Yeah, that
We
makes sense.
literally just looking, and here's the key for all the women out there. It is looking at something he does, noticing something he does, and saying thank you for it, as small as it is. For example, let's suppose that the kids are running around like crazy and your wife is trying to do a Zoom call and she can't hear herself think, and you take the kids outside.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, thank you so much for doing that. You are such a good dad, and that was such a help. Boom, that's it. And it's like, that fills up everything in a guy.
Yeah.
And we as women don't realize it. And the reason we don't realize it, because all of us love to be appreciated, right? Like all of us love to be affirmed. The reason we don't realize that this is such oxygen for men is that that is not our insecurity.
Mm.
Our insecurity isn't, am I any good at what I do, right? It's more likely to be, does he really love me? Is he glad he married me? Would he choose me all over again? We don't realize that our husband is going, I want to be a great dad, but I don't know. Am I? Does she think I'm a great dad? So when she says, thank you, great job at taking the kids so I could do my Zoom call, it's like, oh, that fills up everything in most men.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife the other day, she just said, thank you for providing for our family. And I could cry thinking about it. 'Cause I'm like,
Yeah.
and she probably didn't even know
Right.
how much that meant to me. But that meant more than I love you. That meant more than I'm so glad I married you. That was like it was like wind in my sails.
Yeah.
And if I went to her and said, "Thank you so much for doing the dishes," she would go, "You're welcome." But she
Right.
needs to hear me say, "You have no idea how precious you are to me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, I love this, this, and this about you."
And don't get me wrong, there are statistically, remember we said it's like 80-20, right? There are 80% of men who say that is like what so like speaks to them,
Sure,
which
yeah.
means 20% that's not,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And same thing with women. We do these marriage events all over the place, and we have this like live polling app that we use so we can find out anonymously what the people in the event are like. Okay, here's the national numbers. How does this room?
Mhm.
What is it like for this room? And for all of you in here. And so we always see like, okay, well, it's 76% of the women in the room. So the 24% don't agree,
Yeah.
right?
And the critical part of all of this is it's actually just we're all different. So I can't tell you what Annie is, maybe, for
Mhm.
example. But by understanding this stuff, you begin to have a common language
Mm.
and can then go, is this you? Does this really hit you? And that is what's critical, because we never thought about asking each other these things because we didn't know it mattered. I spend
Yeah,
all
yeah,
my
yeah.
time up in my own head.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think she's like the same way as me, and she's not. And I
Yeah.
didn't know how to communicate and pull out from her what it was.
Yeah. And what a gift to give your spouse to be curious about them.
For
The
sure.
gift of just being like, what's going to make them feel loved?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like Paul, be all things to all people,
Yep.
right? How do you do that with your wife? To be like, I don't receive love in this way, but she does.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm
Yeah.
going to make a conscious effort to tell her that she's precious. Or to your husband, I'm going to make a conscious effort to make him feel competent. Like, that is Christ in the church. That's the model. Like, I heard one theologian the other day say that the best representation of God on this earth, of the divine dance of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, is a husband and wife having sex.
Hmm.
And I was like, weird, first of all. But number two, beautiful, when I started like thinking about like that intimacy, that union, that like connectivity, the vulnerability that is shared. And if sex is done right, not pornified, but like legitimate love making, like that's so beautiful. To think about how God's given us that
Right.
to bear his image.
Yeah.
It's cool. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the area of intimacy and the need for understanding and the need for curiosity is so important in most marriages, and we just don't realize it.
And the need to debunk myths.
Oh, God.
All the things that we hear about how to have great sex, all of those sorts of things may not actually be as accurate as what we learned when we were in high school.
Yeah.
You mean
You know?
15-year-old boys in the locker room aren't the
Yeah.
best source of
Sometimes
information?
they might not be. They might have inaccurate information.
Well, can we give you one of the ones that's like, oh my word, like this just this was a huge issue for us to understand when we started the research, one of our research projects
Yeah.
on sex and intimacy. So one of the main reasons why we don't connect in the bedroom, and what we found is that about 79% of couples have a different desire for frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's not a huge surprise, probably. I'm like impressed that 21% are like all on the same page.
Yeah.
but for most couples, that's not the case. And one of the main reasons why isn't that somebody has a lower sex drive. That's what we think it is. We think one spouse just doesn't want as much.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, that may actually be the case, but the main reason often it's not about the level of libido. It's about that there are two different types of desire. And most of us had no idea when we started all of this research that this was a thing. But it turns out, the idea that we have kind of the Hollywood view of how sex works is that you look at each other and there's a hunger.
Yeah.
And like you see this in the movie, right? Like pretty soon the clothes are off and they're in bed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a sense of hunger, and that you do something
They're
about
both
it.
feeling that.
And they're both feeling this hunger, and you go for it. And that is the way sex is portrayed. And instead, that's one type of desire, which you could call initiating desire. And that's somebody physiologically who they have a desire to pursue sex and they think about it all the time and they're ready at a moment's notice. And, guess who tends to be more likely to have initiating desire? It tends to be tied to testosterone and other typically male hormones. But there's a whole nother kind of desire, and that's called receptive desire. And the person with receptive desire is just as kind of interested and willing, kind of hypothetically, but it turns out that the physiology of that person literally works in reverse order. And they do not feel, generally, that sense of desire up front. They don't feel that sense of hunger. And instead, they decide to get engaged with their spouse. They decide to move forward because they know it's going to be good eventually.
Yeah.
Right? And as their physiology starts getting stimulated, and assuming, by the way, that this is a positive relationship and all of that, as the physiology starts getting stimulated, eventually that sense of desire kicks in that maybe their spouse felt 5 or 10 minutes ago. And so and of course, guess who tends to have receptive desire? It's 73% of women have receptive desire. And so the key is the person with receptive desire in your marriage, whether it's the wife or the husband, they have to be approached differently.
And how do you approach them?
So probably the easiest way to
Not
explain
just asking
it.
for a friend. Here.
Just asking for a friend. I know. The easiest way to explain this is probably that the person with receptive desire, they need what we tend to call anticipation time. And it's essentially sort of flirting with them in the morning or whatever and letting them know what you'd love to have happen later that night so that their brain turns onto that, because otherwise they're just not going to be thinking about it. And so one of the things that's super common is we will hear, people, well-intentioned people who aren't wrong about, hey, husbands, if you would love this to have, you got to help with the kids. You've got to do the dishes. You got to work with the chores.
All good stuff.
All good stuff. Make your wife feel loved. All good stuff. All true. And yet just because you're scrubbing the toilets, is she thinking about sex?
No.
No, not if she has receptive desire. I know.
As you're scrubbing the toilets, you're thinking
You
about
might
sex.
be. but she's like, oh, that's so nice of him, and goes on her way. And so what we tell the men, for example, again, and it's not just men, right? It's the person with initiating desire, because some marriages are obviously flipped. But we, again, stereotypically tell the husbands, you've got to do something to give her that anticipation time, to be like, hey, it's a little cold today. Can we warm each other up tonight? And in code so the kids don't understand. Yeah, exactly. But that then turns that person's brain on to, oh, I wouldn't have been thinking about it. Now I'm thinking about it.
Got it. Interesting.
We don't know what we don't know.
It's like warming up the car in the winter.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
It's exactly
Great
right.
analogy.
Whereas when I first heard this and hearing women talk about this, I was thinking, are you talking about warning? Like, I got to warn you?
That doesn't feel so good.
No, it doesn't.
No.
And that's not it.
Just letting you know what's about to happen tonight.
It's truly anticipation time.
And to the point where the wife will be looking forward to it.
Anticipating
Okay.
by definition.
Yeah.
But this is one of those things that causes so much hurt
Grief.
feelings and grief. And I've been doing everything to help you. I've been loving, I've been tender, I've been kind as a husband to my wife. I'm equal with the chores and with the kids' responsibilities. And yet we're not connecting in this way. And there's so much grief and so much hurt feelings amongst so many men where, and again, sometimes it's the wife with the initiating desire, but in general, to be able to say, one of the things that's missing is that you literally didn't know that your wife's physiology worked in the reverse order.
And see, well, here's the problem. And we have an enemy that feeds a line to all of us.
Yeah.
Tries to kill, steal, and destroy. And the grid that I would run things through is that I want her to want me.
Yes.
And she clearly doesn't. So therefore, I'm undesirable. It hits that insecurity about who I am as a guy. and it was just wrong. That
Mhm.
wasn't the case. That wasn't what was going on in her head. We had one couple tell us that, the
In our
husband,
research, you mean?
yeah, in our research, the husband said to his wife, he said, I'm so grateful that we both have initiating desire.
Yeah.
And she went, not so much.
Huh.
And he went, what do you mean? You don't have the same initiating desire like I do?
Yeah.
And she says, yeah, not really. And he says, but you
initiate.
You initiate. She goes, because I love you.
Oh,
And
yeah.
because I know how important it is to you that I want you.
Well, and also,
And it just was amazing for that guy.
it is also important if we're going to love one another. This is one way that we love one another
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And so we're purposeful about things for the people we care about. This is another area of being purposeful. So
That's right.
that wife she loves her husband, right? And it's not that it doesn't matter to her. It does. But she's not necessarily thinking about it. So, okay, she thinks if I'm going to actively love my husband in one of the ways that really touches his heart, I have to be thinking about it. So the person, we always say, for the person with receptive desire, again, whether that's the wife or the husband, this is something that you can actually have a precious impact on your relationship by making yourself think about it when you wouldn't otherwise.
One woman said, in our interviews, we were interviewing a husband and wife, and she said, we went through a really difficult season, some emotional stuff, trauma, loss of a child, all of those things. And he was going, yeah, but it was one of our, we connected so well during this time. She said, and it was because I knew that this was such a tough time that I actually put reminders in my
Phone.
calendar, my Outlook to ping me and say, every Tuesday night or every Thursday night or whatever it was. And she said, you didn't know I did that, did you? So it was a reminder for her to initiate, to try to come together, because it's easy to start to in trauma and difficult times to kind of just pull apart. And she didn't want that to happen.
Wow.
And he just went, you're kidding. You did that? And she went, yeah. And he goes, you could do that again if you're interested.
Pencil me in.
Yeah.
Dang, man. Wow. That's so good. Yeah, I remember back, there was a season of my life where there was a lot of anxiety and trauma, and I didn't want to have sex.
Yeah.
It was like, this really interesting time where I didn't have the bandwidth or the desire. And what would you say to someone who's feeling that way, but their husband or their wife is really wanting sex, and they're like, I don't think I can give it right now, but he really needs it.
Yeah. Or she does.
Or she does.
Right. Yeah. The issues, there are physiological issues. Like what you're talking about is both like a mental and emotional issue and a physiological issue that goes along with it. Because when you're depressed, for example, when you're dealing with anxiety, there are a lot of things going on in your brain and your body that do not align themselves well with the normal situation for a feeling of desire to arise, for example. And so one of the things, first of all, the spouse of that person just needs to have grace, right? Like this is a season when they need to be working on stuff, and the amount of patience and love that you can show will have lasting impacts all the way through your marriage. It's not just about this season. And so take the long view. And the same message, I would say, to the person who's feeling suddenly that suppressed thing. Take the long view. Because this is a season where there's some healing that probably has to be done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There are some issues that probably have to be addressed. We found that about 3 or 4% of people have what's called resistant desire. We talked about maybe that there's 2 different types of desire, initiating and receptive. Well, there's actually this third, and the resistant desire is what, like you're talking about. It's the car that, the parking brake is on. Like, even if you wanted to drive it, the parking brake is going to have a thing or two to say about that.
And is that just fight, flight, freeze?
It is partly. Yeah, there's all sorts of reasons for that. sometimes resistant desire, like for example, with women, resistant desire sometimes is literally like there's a lot of sexual pain. And
Yeah.
so we found a third of
Actually,
women
physical pain,
physical
not just
pain.
emotional.
Right. Yeah. We actually found that a third of women have sexual pain every third time they have sex.
Mm.
That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are some women who pull back and pull back and pull back, and it becomes a sense of resistance. But for anybody, regardless of what's going on, it's basically like that sense, like what you were talking about. It's a red flashing warning light. It's an indicator. It's a signal, like an indicator in your car saying, look here, there's something that needs some attention. And so the key is, if you're in that season, to recognize you're not weird, you're not abnormal. Tons of people go through this, but it's a signal to look at it so that it doesn't become something that becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and eventually derails this part of your marriage for the long term.
And it's also just, can you talk about it?
Mm.
Most of the folks in our research, they just weren't able to talk about sex. You know?
Yeah, I
And-
think it
and
was 70, I think it was
77%.
77% of couples. I think you're right.
Yeah.
77% of couples couldn't talk about this.
So
Wow.
what
Isn't that
happens-
amazing?
Why? What makes it? I
Go
mean,
ahead.
because I get that to a certain degree. It's like, okay,
It's
sex is this
embarrassing.
intimate
It's awkward.
thing,
Yeah.
but like, are there underlying reasons like that you just can't do it?
No, it's really truly that because it's awkward, because it's this sacred thing that most of us never learned how to talk about. Like, you don't sit around with your friends and talk about this
most people
topic.
don't.
Most people
Yeah.
don't, even like with the couples that you're closest to. It's just one of those areas that it touches so close to your heart that it also leads to a lot of like you're hitting a raw nerve.
Yep, that whole insecurity
Often
thing
the
going
insecurity again.
Yeah.
It's like you said earlier that you as a husband, like, I want my wife to desire me.
Yeah.
And talking about this and hearing certain concerns, it may just confirm, oh my gosh, I
Totally.
feel now I'm really not desirable. As opposed to if you can, again, be curious. We found that if you were able to be curious about your spouse, that the ability to communicate and the ability to connect in this way with your spouse goes way up. So it's really about being curious. Help me understand what's going on. Not why won't you ever,
Mm-hmm.
you know, can't you just, come to bed a little bit earlier so we can, get busy? And instead, help me understand what's going on. What can I do to help? What are you thinking and feeling? Is there a disconnect? It's honestly, this is not to be a commercial. I really don't mean it that way. But when we wrote the book, it's called Secrets of Sex and Marriage. And we did this big national study, and we wrote it with Dr. Michael Seitzma, who's a renowned sex therapist. And one of the reasons we wrote the book was to give couples something they could read together and talk about. And that would be an encouragement, not just with our book, but any book that's written by a sex therapist that has that really good information in it, as opposed to the pop culture information where like half of it is wrong. Get a resource that's accurate in that way and use it as a starting point for conversation.
Yeah.
And that'll help.
Yeah, that's good. What would you say to wives whose whose husbands are battling pornography?
So one of the most important things that we found, and I'm curious what you think. Okay. One of the most important things that we found is, first of all, to understand that it's not for the reason you think it is. Because most of the time for us as women, we think it's about us. We're not attractive. We're not desirable enough. If I gave him more sex, he wouldn't be doing this. Like, no, set all those things aside. Those are not the case. It is usually that there is an emotional tie because it's feeding something emotional in him, and it's a behavioral addiction that is similar to if he's addicted to a substance. Now, the medical community doesn't really recognize it that way, but the behavioral community does. Like the people who deal with this recognize that there's a compulsion. And it probably started very young.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was feeling stupid because he threw the pass, in the big game, and it like they didn't catch it and they lost the game, and he completely messed up in front of 1,000 people, and he feels like a fool and a failure.
Mm-hmm.
But he goes and looks at those images and he feels good. He feels like a man. He
Mm-hmm.
feels it, like it hits
In
everything.
the moment.
In the moment. It
he-
hit.
He's probably loathing it as much as
Yeah,
she
yeah.
is, most
But
likely.
but in the moment, as a 16-year-old or whatever,
Yeah.
he's learned that's a dopamine hit,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Like he's learned
It's a
that
medication
it's
strategy.
a medication
Absolutely.
strategy, and
Yeah.
and so he's learned that feels that he has learned that feeds
Mm-hmm.
that thing in him that's hungry.
Yeah, yeah.
And so then the next time when his dad yells at him for not getting a good grade on a test, and then he goes and looks at those images,
Yep.
and it feeds it again, and then again, and then again, he's building up a habit of, as you put it, medicating. So for a wife to recognize this is often a long-term habit that he may loathe in himself.
Totally.
He may hate that this is a habit that's been built. He may hate that it hurts you.
Mm.
And one of the things we've found as we've interviewed all the experts on this is that a man getting free takes two things. And this is not 100% of the cases, again, this is probably that 80-20, but a man getting free, it probably takes two things. And one of them is hard to hear. Okay. It takes him deciding
Mm-hmm.
that he's going to get free and do what he needs to do to get victory over this. And there's going to have to be a male accountability partner, the men's group at church, the people who can come alongside and say, you're not weird. Like this is common, but we need to be able to move past it. But secondly, what a lot of studies have found is that it also takes, to some degree, his wife being able to say, I'm going to have as much grace and understanding while you're going through this process as I can. There may be boundaries. That's usually the case. There often have to be boundaries.
Mm.
Like as long as you're, if you're not repentant and you're not working on this, then we're not working in the bedroom.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Like boundaries sometimes have to be there, but a guy has to feel like he can step out and talk about this with you
Wow.
and confess things that are really deep in his heart, that are so vulnerable, and know that you're going to handle that with tenderness and care. One man described it to me in one of our research interviews as he said, picture me trying to inch out on a frozen pond
Mm.
and trying to feel if the ice is safe for me to go a little further and that's the kind of, I'm on tenterhooks, right? And if I feel the ice is cracking under me and it can't hold the weight of this conversation, I'm going to retreat and I'm not going to do that again. But if I can feel like the ice can hold, if I feel like our relationship can hold the weight of this conversation, and that even if you're hurt, you're not going to judge me as a terrible human being, you're going to see my heart for you, and you're going to want to help me get free of this, then I'm much more likely to raise it again. I'm much more likely to say, here's what would help. I'm much more likely to say, okay, I think it is time for us to get a filtering software, as opposed to, I just can't even raise it. I just can't even talk about it.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, the two things, if you're a wife whose husband's looking at pornography, number one is he needs to have the desire to change on his own.
Yes, it has to be him. It's can't be you. You can't do this for him. Yeah.
And secondly, which is hard to hear, is you need to have grace for him and communicate that grace for him.
Well, not just grace for him, but grace with the whole situation, including you,
Wow.
because your feelings are legitimately hurt. This is legitimately an issue in your marriage. Don't think that we're saying it's not. It is.
And it's not all on you.
And it's not all on you.
In fact, it's not on you.
Right.
Well, correct.
Yeah.
It's not on you at all. But and that's the issue, is you could hear having grace as being on you. It's not. It is a matter of,
or about you,
or about you. It's not that he doesn't love you. It's all
or
these.
think you're attractive. Or
Correct. It is him getting free of something that he has been medicating, as you put it, in himself because of a weakness and a woundedness in himself. But like any weakness or woundedness, think about an area that you are weak and wounded as a wife and how much difference it makes if
Mhm.
he can come alongside you and say, I'm here.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
can
yeah.
talk about it and have kind of that tender approach with your heart. And that's all that we're saying.
Which is so hard. I mean, I can't even imagine like what that must be like to hear that for some women and be like,
Yeah.
I feel like I just got cheated on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you kind of did.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it is cheating.
Yes.
It's you are having sexual fantasies about somebody who is not your wife.
And
It
so you're now saying
is.
I need to come in with grace? Like, so explain that a little bit more. What would you kind of say to a woman that's like, whoa, that's kind of hard for me to hear that.
Yeah, and believe me, I get it. And we have done so much research
Mm.
on this, and we've talked to so many people, both couples where they've gone through this and come out the other side well, and others where they ended up divorced
Mm.
because they weren't able to address it, and it was his issue, right,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
didn't get addressed. And so, really, truly, the issue when you talk about having grace, if he is addressing it, remember we said there's two issues,
That's
right? If he is repentant, if he is trying, if he is meeting with the men's group.
And can I jump in right
Yeah,
there?
absolutely.
The sex therapist that we talked to on this said, in maybe every situation is unique. However, the strong recommendation is that she, the wife, is not your accountability.
Never,
Amen.
never,
Yes.
never can be. No,
Don't go there.
no,
Yeah.
never can be. But if he is taking those steps and is just having a difficult time with it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like anything else, any other sin, it just happens to be this is a very emotional one
Yeah.
that has a really, really harsh impact on your marriage. But it's like any other sin. It is something that we all fall, and we all need God's kindness. It's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance.
Yeah.
And so I'm just telling you if you want to help your
Yeah.
marriage move through this, it requires courage
Yeah.
to have that sense of grace, even if you also have boundaries.
Yeah.
Maybe a better word even than grace is kindness.
That's good.
It is a need to be kind, even when you're strong about what needs to happen.
What would you say to Christian wives who feel like their husbands are emotionally detached, or they feel like they can't connect in the way, and they're like, I just wish he would share more? How do you get a man in a relationship? Maybe this is a question for both you guys. How do you get, or a woman, to open up emotionally?
Well, when you are in a relationship with a husband that you think he just doesn't care, like he's emotionally detached, he doesn't even have emotions, like what's going on, like he doesn't want to talk, recognize one really, really key thing, which is the vast majority of men absolutely adore their wives. Your husband adores you.
Mm.
And unless he's like a really, really tiny percentage, he wants to connect. He may not know how. He may not understand. He may look, for example, at you and your girlfriends. You sit and you can talk for 2 hours over coffee about each other's feelings. And he's like, I can't even measure up to that. I'm not even going to try. Like maybe he's felt inadequate
Yeah.
because he's tried and he felt like it got shut down. And so recognize that even if he says something simple like, tell me about how that meeting went today, honey. If he asks that question, when you answer it, say, thank you so much for asking. That means so much to me. I guarantee you he will do that again.
Yeah.
Right?
What gets rewarded, it gets repeated.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And well, it's that we're back to that insecurity inside of us. We just don't know how to do it. We
Yeah.
know that she is different than us, so we can look at her and she's different, but we just don't know how to connect. And
Yeah.
so one of the things in one of our studies was, what's the best indicator of best friends? When someone is a best friend to another person, because we kind of just, our friends, we can talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big things that we found, and there's studies out there on this, is that the number one predictor of whether someone is going to be best friends with another person
And share and be able to communicate things
is not whether or not they understand each other, they have the same temperament, shared values. All of those sorts of things are good, but they pale in comparison to the number one predictor, which is geographic proximity. You are best friends with the person you hang out with the most. So just let's get real simple for the guys. Hang out with your wife. And that will provide opportunities to talk about things. And as you build that confidence in talking with her about just anything, all of a sudden, you're then able to maybe go a little deeper and you have a little more confidence that I'm not a total doofus. I can actually do this.
And one of the things we had talked about earlier was if you want to be able to have really good like conversations, because that's the heart of many wives, right? Like, I just want him to listen, right? I want him to care about what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Is actually build up a habit in your marriage where you're saying it would be so cool if you could share what you're feeling, honey, right?
Yeah.
Like for him. And as we talked about, like maybe you need a couple hours to come back and tell me like what it is that you're thinking and feeling about this. And so instead of saying, but it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
Like he should be able to just listen in the moment. He should be able to tell me what he's feeling in the moment. Well, your best girlfriends can because their brains are wired differently than his.
Yeah.
And so give him that extra time. And then when he comes back and he says, I realized that what I was thinking when my boss said such and such was that I was worried that I might be on the layoff list. And if I'm on the layoff list, like I'm on a question mark list, like then I start worrying about how I'm going to provide for the family and, whatever. And you can say, oh, I'm so sorry, but you're amazing. And here's why I think you're so good. And, all these things to build him up. And I guarantee he's going to want to talk about that again because you responded in a way that actually affirms you can do this conversation thing. You can do this listening thing.
And for the guys, we're not putting all this on the women, to affirm and make us feel. We have to recognize that she wants to be just as we want to be desired in the bedroom.
Yeah.
She wants to be desired for in the communication, that you're pulling this out of me, that you want to spend time
curious
with me.
about me.
You're curious. I mean, it's honest. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
But we have to rewire ourselves because we spend all of our time in our own brains and we think that they're there too. And they're just not.
Yeah. This might be a cheap example, but it almost feels like in the same way that I have to have grace for my wife for taking 30 minutes to get ready when I take 5 minutes to get ready, we have to have, or the wives have to have grace for their husbands oftentimes to take some time to be ready for that conversation.
That is
open up emotionally.
Great example.
That is a great example.
That is
Cool.
a great example. You mind if we steal it?
Steal it. Yeah, I just came up with it. So, no,
it's true though.
For sure, because I don't understand. I'm like, why can't you just go faster when kids are, trying to get the kids in the car and we're so late for church and for some dudes, we just take longer to open. Like we want to connect with our wives.
Right.
Yeah.
We want to have that conversation. But sometimes we don't know how. And what you're saying is, wives, give your husband some time. Like tee them up early in the day. Like, hey, I'd love to hear about this, that, and the other. Can we talk about that tonight? So he can spend some time thinking about it. And then what gets rewarded gets repeated.
Yeah.
Like, bless the first step, right?
Exactly.
Like, if he takes a step forward, if I take my wife to the gym and she's not benching, 400 pounds, it's like, okay, well, she doesn't have the capacity to,
right.
And I shouldn't hold her to that. So if she's making progress and that's her desire, then great. I'm going to honor her in that.
Yep.
And I'm going to affirm that in her. And so in the same way, wives, if your husband's taking steps towards emotional vulnerability, jump on it.
Yep.
Affirm the heck out of it.
Absolutely. As opposed to, I can tell you right now that when we as women are like, I can't believe you never listened to me. that is usually not a winning strategy.
Yeah.
I mean, and it may be true. Like it
Yeah.
may be an issue, truly an issue that he needs to work on. But the way that you get him to work on it is by affirming the positive, because usually kind of shredding the negative, it usually just shuts a guy down. And it's because of, again, those two different insecurities that we talked about, where with men, the insecurity and the question and the self-doubt that's always there is, am I any good at what I do? And you've just said, no, you're not. And you're a failure. And so that for a man usually means it's so painful, I need to withdraw. Whereas if you will reward, as you said, if you will catch the good things, not just the bad ones, if you'll catch the good things, he will move towards that. And again, this is not just one-sided, right? Like there's
Yeah.
all sorts of things that we want our men to understand about those inner needs in our hearts. But for the things that we as women can do, that's one of them.
That's good. Where do you see couples fail in marriage? Like what are a few key areas where you're like, that's a telltale sign that that marriage isn't going to work?
Well, for me, the biggest opportunity for failure is when I try to, in my mind, explain why Shaunti is doing something or why she doesn't do something. Because the script that I have running is usually not a script of understanding or of a positive reason. And instead, I attribute negative motives or a lack of care or whatever it is. I'm not looking at what we often talk about is believe the best in your spouse. Because if you will believe the best, you're telling yourself a story that's most likely true in many cases. But we're so wired to see the negative and let it, just chap us.
Well, I mean, the easiest and a really simple answer to that is your marriage is truly going to go through a hard place if when you get hurt, you find yourself believing the worst of your spouse's intentions towards you. Because statistically, again, except in a small, like there are unfortunately marriages where there's abuse, for example. But that's a small percentage of marriages. And the vast majority, we care about each other. And instead, when you're hurt and you have that ow feeling and like, he knew how that would make me feel and he said it anyway, you're believing the worst of his intentions towards you. We actually found that for the vast majority of marriages, when they move to a good place, instead of moving towards a bad place, it's because we have decided to say, I'm going to choose to believe the best of my spouse's motivations and intentions. And for example, that instead of they knew how that would make me feel, no, they must not have known how that would make me feel, or they wouldn't have said it that way. And so if you truly want to avoid that downhill slide, learn to recognize just how much your spouse cares about you and treat them as if they do.
That's good. I've found in my own marriage, I can really put a dagger in my wife because I know her well. I know her insecurities. I know just the words to say if I'm feeling insecure that will bring her down. But I also know how to build her up. And what I've found is when I put the dagger in my wife and she chooses to believe the best in me, I'm like, oh my gosh, like how did I get so lucky? What would you guys say to a couple that feels like we just are knifing each other constantly? How do you get out of that knife fight?
One person has to stop.
And that's interesting what Shaunti just said there. One person. We always hear, well, it takes two, if he's not going to, or if she's not going to, then I'll be darned. And it's kind of like the old Dr. Phil thing. How's that working for you? It's not. So one person, whether it's he or she, take that first step. And,
well, how do you take the first step when you feel like you're being abused?
Well, if you're being abused,
Well, I
it's a
mean, even
different
just
thing.
verbally, even just like, gosh, this dude cannot come home and not say a snarky thing to me.
Well, and okay, so recognize there's a difference between I have been so kind to him and he is just cruel to me. That is a completely different situation than we've gotten into a habit and we're both being snarky to each other
Mm-hmm.
and we're both hurting each other's feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two completely different situations. If you in before God, you can stand before God and your friends and your pastor and say, I am doing everything I can to try to be the person I am supposed to be,
Mm-hmm.
and it hasn't softened his heart or her heart, and there's just constant abuse, verbal abuse, then that's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
But in most cases, we respond to snarkiness with snarkiness,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
we respond to hurting each other's feelings with hurting each other's feelings.
Mm.
And we don't, and here's the key, we don't even recognize that we're doing it.
Mm.
If I go to Jeff and I'm like, why did you do this with the kids? Like, you knew such and such would happen if you took the kids out without their coats or whatever. I am shredding that part of my husband that is wanting to be a great dad and has that question of, am I able at this?
Mm.
And so maybe it shouldn't surprise me that, we have an argument and what I most need is a hug and he walks away.
Mm.
Because that's shredding that part of my heart. And we tend to have, unfortunately, a negative cycle that comes up when those things happen. And usually it takes one person
Yeah.
to interrupt it. And it takes one person to say, I am going to, as best as I can, I am going to hug my wife anyway.
Mm.
Or I'm going to treat him with respect anyway. And it does interrupt it.
Can you share real quick? We did a study on this. It was called the 30-Day Kindness Challenge.
Yeah.
And it was not a two-sided approach to if you're having
It was
issues
one-sided
in
Whoa.
your relationship. So why
Yeah.
don't you tell how the beginning numbers and the ending numbers for folks that took this challenge to really kind of rewire themselves in their relationship with their spouse. It wasn't necessarily the spouse knowing that they were
Even
doing
doing
this
it.
challenge. It was all one person taking it upon themselves.
Mm.
The 30-Day Kindness Challenge is essentially, it's an empirically tested intervention now, where you pick someone that you want a better relationship with. And many people in the study did this for their spouse and didn't tell them that they were doing it,
Yeah, yeah.
right? But it doesn't have to be a spouse. Like you can do this for your child. I did this for my 16-year-old daughter at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Because she's a great kid, but 16,
Yeah, yeah.
my head wanted to
Yeah.
explode. And so what you do is when you've picked that one person, you do the same 3 things every day for 30 days. You don't say anything negative about them, either to them or about them to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm doing this for my husband, I can be polite to him, but if I go to my girlfriends behind the scenes and I'm like, ugh, you would not believe what he did, I'm sabotaging how I feel about him. So you
Yeah.
can't do either say negative things to or about. The second thing you do every day for 30 days is you find something that you can sincerely praise about them, and you tell them and you tell somebody else.
Whoa.
So I can't complain behind the scenes to my girlfriends, but I'm looking for things to praise. And so I notice something that he did, like handled something so well with a difficult person at church. And I tell him that. And then I tell my girlfriends, you know what he did yesterday? And now I'm building him up both to him and in my mind.
Yeah.
Right. And then the third thing, every day for 30 days is you do just one simple action of kindness or generosity. And so this could literally be like, I know you have no time to make yourself lunch before you run out the door to your client meeting. Let me just do that for you. Like just a simple action of kindness. And what we found is that if you do those 3 things every day for 30 days, 89% of relationships improved. 89% is a huge number in social science.
Yeah, yeah.
But it makes perfect sense because the biggest thing that's happening isn't that you're changing the temperature of the relationship, although that's a piece of it.
Yeah.
The biggest thing you're changing is
Yourself.
yourself. because now you start seeing all the good things that you weren't focusing on before.
Wow.
Because
Amen.
and you're lessening the impact of those things that annoy you. It's just you're retraining your
And
brain. It's remarkable.
It's one-sided, and it's amazing. If
Yeah.
if Shaunti says, Jeff, I believe in you. And I may be feeling like I've made some boneheaded decisions, and she says, I believe in you. I want to hit that mark.
Mm-hmm.
I realize that she's giving me grace.
Yeah.
She's helping me, and I want to be the man that she thinks I am.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Golly, dude. This was something else. I want more. Where can we find you guys on social media, on the internet? How can people follow along with what you're doing? Obviously, there's the book. Where can we find you?
The easiest way is to go to shaunti.com. It's SHAUNTI.com.
You got Shaunti.com?
A long time ago.
Let's
yes.
go. Congratulations.
I know.
And see, here's the thing. That name, Shaunti, it comes from, it's an Indian name. Indian name. So it's one of the most popular names
Oh.
In
in
India.
because her parents were in the Peace Corps when she was
Okay.
conceived.
You guys crushing it in India right now? Or what?
Well, no. I confuse a lot of Indians when I meet them.
Okay.
But yeah, the easiest way to find us is shaunti.com or any of our Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. It's all Shaunti Feldhahn.
Shaunti Feldhahn.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being on the podcast. Guys,
Absolutely.
get the book. Go to Shaunti.com, Shaunti Feldhahn on social media. It's going to be a great follow. Very grateful for you guys coming all this way to be on the podcast.
Thanks.
This
Well,
was great.
we also have a new podcast ourselves
Let's go.
called I Wish You Could Hear This, because we constantly were hearing these amazing things in the research and going, I wish people could hear this. And then we went, wait a minute.
They
Now they can. Let's do that in a podcast. Yeah.
Gosh, great name for a podcast. Well, thank you guys. It's been an honor. I wish you could hear this. Check out the podcast. Check out the books. Shaunti.com, Shaunti Feldhahn on social media. Jeff, Shaunti, thank you so much for being on the Jesus People podcast.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for tuning in.
Brian, great. Appreciate you.